the Courageous Self-Care Podcast. I'm your host, Christina Marlette. On this podcast, you're going to learn about self-care that goes beyond bubble baths, chocolate, and wine. It is the real self-care that is strategic, that gives you more energy, that can get really uncomfortable, and that will transform your life. You can go to my website, christinamarlette.com, to take the self-care quiz. And when you take that quiz, you will learn your self-care style, which is very valuable information to find out where you're at on your self-care journey. Since this is the beginning of the Courageous Self-Care podcast, I wanted to share with you today about the core values of courageous self-care. The first one being courage. And what I feel it's important to know is the difference between bravery and courage. A few months ago, I was asked to give a talk on courage, since that is one of my core values. And I got curious, what is the difference between bravery and courage? They're often used synonymously. And what I learned from doing some research is that bravery and courage have a fundamental philosophical difference. Are you curious? I would love to share it with you. Let's talk about bravery first. When we say that someone is brave, what it actually means is that they are acting without fear. So if someone is brave, they don't actually have fear around that situation or person or circumstance. There's an absence of fear. So there's actually nothing to overcome. For example, people might perceive me as being very brave when I'm public speaking. I love speaking. I'm an international speaker, and the bigger the audience, the better. So there's no fear for me to overcome when I'm speaking. It's not like some people describe speaking as being a greater fear than death. For me, it's not that. I love it. It makes me feel fulfilled. So what happens is that I'm brave around speaking. I get up, I don't have fear around it, I do my talk, and I finish. And that's bravery. Courage is actually quite different. It's higher on the energetic vibration scale in terms of words. So what does that mean? Words all have their own energy signature. They put energy out. And there are words that don't feel good when we use them, either towards ourselves or towards others. Those words have a lower vibration. There are words that feel amazing when we use them towards ourselves or others, like joy or abundance. Those words feel very good. And so when we're thinking of bravery and courage, courage is actually higher on the energetic vibration scale than bravery. Why is that? I will tell you in a moment. First, I want to invite you, if you are interested in becoming a guest on the Courageous Self-Care podcast, I would love to have you. If you've got a story of courage, or if you have a message that resonates with one of the 12 foundations of courageous self-care, please go to my website, christinamarlette.com, and fill out your application. I would love to have you as a guest on the show. Now, moving into courage. So courage, it has this higher vibration because it actually means acting in spite of fear. It is overcoming the obstacle of fear. And I love looking up the etymology of words. They're where they came from and what they meant originally. So if you look at the back history of courage, it has as one of the roots corps, which means, in French it's cœur, which means your heart. And courage combines both the heart and the mind. I just love the idea of courage because the heart portion of it means there needs to be some value or ideal on the other side of courage in order to move through that fear. And that ideal might be something like love. It might be passion. It might be compassion. It might be purpose. So whatever's on the other side is worth moving through that fear towards because of that ideal. That's why we're using our heart, because we're imagining and feeling into what's on the other side. We're also using our mind because we need to determine which ideal it is that's on the other side, and if it's worth being courageous and moving through that fear. Here's an example from my own life. I am not brave with insects. Both of my kids, my daughter and my son, they have bravery. They have no fear around insects. My daughter likes to pet bees. I do not. I prefer them from a distance, making honey and pollinating, but I do not like to get up close and personal with them. They like interacting with all sorts of insects. They like examining them and picking them up, and that's not me. I definitely, when it comes to insects, if I do need to interact with them, have to work up my courage. So one day I was sitting here in my office and I heard a buzzing coming from outside the door. I was perplexed because there were no open windows or doors and I was home by myself. But somehow this gigantic bee had made its way into my home. I was not very happy about that because my bug rescuers were not home. They would get spiders out for me, and it's not one of my jobs at home. So I decided that I would usher the bee outside. So I opened the door up wide and I said, "Come on, bee." And I was trying to telepathically give this bee information that the door was wide open and that it could go outside and it would be happy and free. My telepathic powers did not work with the bee. It kept on buzzing around the kitchen at the window, not at the door. So then I got a vase of flowers that we happened to have, and I put the flowers by the door and I was trying to entice the bee with the fresh flowers, and I put the flowers closer to the bee, and getting closer frightened me, but I wasn't really scared of being stung. I just don't like the bugs. So I had the vase and the bee was not interested, probably because the flowers were covered in pesticides. So it couldn't even recognize that they were flowers. I gave up on that. The bee was very interested in the window. And so I thought, well, I could just leave it there until my kids get home and then they can take care of the bee. But then I had this tug of, what if the bee died? I value life and I value all living creatures, even if I don't want to interact with them. I do value life. And so I had to work up my courage and decide with my mind and my heart that I was going to move through my fear and help the bee get outside no matter what. Not waiting for my kids to get home because it wasn't anywhere close to the end of school. The bee was buzzing around the window, and I would have opened the window with no problem, except I also had fear around that window because the first time I opened it when we moved into this house 3 years ago, the whole window pretty much fell out. I caught it at the last moment, and it was in danger of falling onto the ground and breaking, and it's a very old style of window, and there are no replacements anywhere we've checked because we wanted to replace it after this incident. So the window fell out, and that's a whole other story. Perhaps I'll share it with you sometime. It's pretty funny. I was scared of opening the window for fear of it falling out again. It would certainly liberate the bee, but then I would be stuck with the window halfway between the house and the ground. I didn't want to do that again. So again, I checked in with this idea of courage. How am I going to get this bee outside? It wasn't coming towards the door. I didn't want to trap it with a glass or anything. It was really big. So I thought, okay, I could open the window. And while I was pondering this, somehow the bee crawled into this little area in the window that was underneath a metal part, and it's a very complex window. And it stopped buzzing, and I thought, oh no, it died because of my inaction and my contemplation of courage and my ideals that make it worthwhile. But I checked where it was, and it was kind of tucked in there, and I poked it a little bit, or got the washcloth, actually. I didn't want to touch it. I got the washcloth and poked it and it buzzed feebly. I thought, oh no, time is running out. So I, again, tapped into that courage, moved through the fear. I know I wanted the bee to be free and pollinating and making honey and not trapped in my house and dead. So I opened the window a tiny little bit and it didn't fall out. So that was good. And the bee did not move. So I got the washcloth and I was trying to direct it out by gently brushing it through this little crack. It didn't work. And I thought, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? So then I got one of the flowers. There was a Gerber daisy, and I opened the window a little bit more. Thankfully, it stayed within the frame, and I got the flower and I pushed the bee several times, and that did the trick. It flew to freedom, and I was so happy and proud of myself for overcoming my fear. And that is the whole point of being courageous and taking action towards our ideals, is that when we get to that other side, we climb that big wave and it's very terrifying. And I know this is a funny story, but really, I did have to work up my courage, and there are things that take way more courage than that. But this is the story I'm sharing with you right now. So you go up that wave in your tiny little boat and you're terrified of what's on the other side. And then you come down the other side and actually it's more beautiful and wonderful and peaceful than you ever could have imagined. So I liberated that bee, and it was like a double dose of pleasure, because not only did I know that the bee was free, I had also moved through my terror of interacting and potentially touching that bee. So on the other side of courage, we feel incredible. I'm going to relate that to self-care in a moment. I would love to invite you, if you are interested in being a sponsor of the Courageous Self-Care podcast. It is in its early stages. So I have some very reasonable sponsorship opportunities getting in at the ground floor level. If you would like to apply to be a sponsor and promote your own product, service, book, workshop, whatever it might be, please go to ChristinaMarlette.com and click on apply to be a sponsor. So bravery and courage, we now know the difference. And it's fear. And it also is that ideal on the other side. So what does that have to do with self-care? I'm going to wrap this up. Next time, I'm going to talk more in depth about self-care and the different kinds of self-care, because we actually have a big misconception about what self-care is. And we end up going in circles with the kind of self-care that most people try to practice. When it comes to courageous self-care, we're getting into the self-care that can be really uncomfortable. It is not necessarily having a bubble bath. It's not necessarily drinking a glass or a bottle of wine. Those, in fact, may reduce our ability to relate well with ourselves and care for ourselves. So self-care that I'm interested in is the stuff that goes deep. It takes courage. It involves a lot of reflection and moving through fear. But what's on the other side of this strategic self-care is amazing. It's like my bee experience, but amplified 100 times, because it's moving through the real big issues of life. And we're going to get more into that on the next episode. Thank you so much for watching and listening. This is a podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm Christina Marlette. The Courageous Self-Care podcast airs every Monday through Friday. And make sure you come back to hear more. Remember to go to our website, Christina Marlette, and that is Christina with a CH. Marlette is MARLETT.com, to take the self-care quiz and find out where you are at in your ability to be strategic with your self-care. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll connect again soon.